Bonjour. Thank you. Good morning. I want to talk about what a lot of Canadians are worried about, what a lot of Canadians are feeling when they go to buy groceries or what they feel when they go to fill up their cars. The cost of everything is going up. The cost of gas has now hit about $2 or more for people across the country, $2 a liter or more. We're seeing cost of groceries so high that families are trying to find discounts and deals to get enough the food they want to celebrate Mother's Day or to go and visit a family member. They have to think twice. Can I do the road trip to go visit my parents or to visit my grandparents? Is it possible? Can I afford it? Families that were planning for maybe road trips this summer to visit relatives that are further away are now rethinking if they can afford it. It's seriously hitting families, and they're wondering what's going on and how can they can afford to live their lives now with the cost of living going so high. And at the same time, while people are struggling, families are struggling, workers are struggling, people are hurting. At the same time, we see these gas companies, these oil and gas companies, posting record profits. Imperial Oil has experienced its highest profit in 30 years. Cenovus increased its profits seven times in 1 year. And Suncor has jumped profits 3 times. It's 3 times higher than previous year. So we're seeing significant and record profits for these large oil and gas companies. At the same time, we're seeing corporate grocery companies or grocery stores also posting huge profits. So we see the cost of living going up. And anytime the cost of living goes up, there are winners and losers. The winners are these large corporations, the CEO, the shareholders. Those at the very, very top are benefiting from the inflation. And we see families hurting. They are hurting because of this inflation. The cost of living is hurting families, crunching their budgets, making it impossible to do the things that they want to do, to be able to buy the food that they love or their family enjoys, to be able to travel and visit relatives that they want to visit. That's the reality. At the same time, as the cost of living has gone up and inflation has gone up, we've also seen that government revenue has gone up. GST, for example, has gone up because as the cost of things go up, the GST revenue for government has gone up. And so what we're saying, in response to inflation, when the cost of living goes up, the only response we've seen from most governments is to increase interest rates, which again makes it harder for families. People are frustrated with that. And I put a question forward. Why is it that when the cost of living goes up, when inflation goes up, the only people that suffer are people and workers and families? Why is it that the only response? Why can't it be that we actually say, you know what, when the cost of living goes up, particularly when we know that it benefits corporations, that those corporations pay their fair share, that we put in place an excess profit tax on those companies that are enjoying record profits or much higher profits as a result of the cost of living going up, and that we take those profits and invest those back into people in a meaningful way. And so what we're proposing today, the whole point of the GST tax credit was to offset the fact that GST impacts families harder than it impacts those at the very top, the ultra wealthy. And so the whole purpose and spirit of the GST tax credit was to equalize that, to help families out. So what we're saying is this, specifically in concrete, let's put forward a excess profit tax. The Liberals are proposing something similar for banks and insurance companies. We support that. Let's expand that to include grocery stores, corporate grocery stores and oil and gas companies, and anyone that's made an excess profit in this time, and put that revenue towards 2 specific and concrete measures. Let's increase the Canadian child benefit by $500 per year and increase the GST tax credit also by $500 per year. This would specifically help families about $1,000 at the highest or $500. That's real help to people right now. And it tackles the fundamental question in an inflation. Why is it that the wealthy companies get to make more and families have to suffer? And why do governments allow that to happen? The whole point of government is to level that, to ensure that companies aren't gouging or exploiting a difficult time and that families aren't being hurt. So let's tax the excess profits and invest those back into people with increased child benefit and an increased GST tax credit. This will help 40% of Canadians. Millions of people will get the help they need, and people that need help the most will get it. That's what we're proposing today. Donc aujourd'hui, comme on a noté, c'est vraiment un temps difficile pour les familles, pour les travailleurs. À cause de la coût de la vie qui augmente, les gens, les familles font face des grands défis. C'est tellement difficile pour acheter l'essence, pour les voitures, pour les familles qui achètent les épiceries. Ils ont de la misère à acheter les choses qu'ils ont besoin parce que le coût des épiceries a augmenté. Donc, ce qu'on propose aujourd'hui, c'est de répondre à la question que dans les cas d'inflation, on a vu et on voit maintenant que les ultra-riches gagnent plus d'argent, plus de profits, mais monsieur, madame, tout le monde font face à des grands défis. C'est difficile pour eux et on veut répondre, réagir à cette problématique. Dans le passé, la seule solution qu'on a vue quand le coût de la vie augmente, c'est d'augmenter l'intérêt. Et ça encore frappe fort sur les familles. Donc, pourquoi c'est tout le temps le cas que dans une situation d'inflation, les ultra-riches gagnent plus de profits, plus d'argent et les familles ont de la misère, ont de la difficulté? Pourquoi? On propose que les compagnies comme les grandes entreprises pétrolières qui ont gagné des profits records dans ce temps d'inflation, les entreprises d'épicerie, les grands magasins, encore ont des grands profits. On doit taxer les profits excessifs de ces compagnies, de ces entreprises, et puis réinvestir dans les gens. On propose 2 mesures spécifiques. On propose avec un crédit pour la GST. On veut qu'on augmente cette montant de $500 et aussi avec le bénéfice canadien pour les enfants, on augmente cette montant de $500. Donc, ça, c'est l'argent direct aux familles qui en ont le plus besoin pour les aider dans ce temps difficile, pour reconnaître que les ultra-riches gagnent plus de profits dans ce temps et les familles ont de la misère. On peut réagir dans une manière différemment. On peut aider les familles. Et c'est ce qu'on propose aujourd'hui. Une augmentation pour des gens, presque $1,000 si on a les deux crédits, les deux avantages. Et ça va aider presque 40% de la population canadienne. Donc, ça va vraiment aider des millions de Canadiens. C'est une mesure concrète et une façon d'aider les gens dans ce temps difficile. C'est notre proposition, une proposition concrète pour aider les familles. Et c'est quelque chose qu'on va exiger le gouvernement de faire. Merci, thank you. Avec ça, je suis prêt pour vos questions. With that, I'm ready for your questions.
We'll start with questions in the room, and those of you joining us online, please use the raise hand function to ask a question. First question, David?
Hi, Mrs. Singh. I totally understand you're announcing the increases to the child benefit and the GST tax credit, but I wanted to ask you about your experiences in Peterborough. We saw some video on social media when you were visiting a campaign office while you were campaigning with an Ontario candidate. Can you tell me about what you experienced, what the other people who were working on that campaign experience, as that crowd of people were saying things like traitor, other signs and stuff like that they were holding? What was your experiences?
Certainly. So I was attending an event in Peterborough for the candidate Jen Deck. I first of all have to say that the event was a beautiful event. Folks from all age groups. We had young people in the crowd. We had families. We had elderly folks in the crowd, elders and community activists. It was an incredible event, and Jen is an incredible candidate. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and the great showing of support there for really what we want to do is to lift people up, to give people help. Things like our dental care program and the provincial mental health program. There's a lot of support for those initiatives and a really warm reception. And the entry into the event and the exit of the event is where we received some negativity, but the event itself was great. I also want to acknowledge that I've been to Peterborough a number of times and have always been really well received and experienced, had a good time there. But what we did face were some folks that were expressing displeasure with some of the positions I've taken. But what I really want to highlight, there was folks that were saying some really bad, some really horrible things. They were saying, some folks were saying, I hope you die and things along that nature. A lot of aggression and violence in terms of the behavior and demeanor. And I was okay on a personal level. I was able to get into the event and out back to the vehicle without any particular issue. But what it does remind me is that there is a level of polarization that's going on in politics, which is troubling. It shouldn't be that someone has to be, physically trained in martial arts and able to deal with conflict to be a politician. I think it's absolutely necessary for people to express dissatisfaction, to say they disagree with something, that they think it's really horrible that someone is making a particular law pass, or the impact of this will hurt their families. I think that's all well merited. But what we're seeing is, instead of saying, I don't like what you do, or I don't agree with your decision, they're saying, I want you to die, or I hope you die. And I think that clearly people listening at home will say that there's something wrong with that. And there are some people that are feeding that type of polarization, and that's not good for our democracy. It's not good for society. We should be able to disagree. We can disagree vehemently about a policy, about a decision, about the impacts of that decision on one's family or community. Those are important things. But when it gets to this level, it doesn't help in making better decisions. It doesn't help our communities feel safer. While it's a small minority in this case, it is something really troubling. We should be able to disagree as a society respectfully, maybe even angrily. But it doesn't have to come to the point where it's getting so polarized that people's safety can be at risk and people are feeling these type of threats. And so that's some of the context that I experienced in Peterborough.
As a reporter, I've covered your campaigns. You've had to endure a lot. The team that is around you vicariously has to endure a lot as a result of that. How does that experience compare to the other things that you and your team and the people around you have experienced on the campaign trail?
Well, that particular event, it was more on the aggressive and a bit on the violent side in terms of the language that was being used. So it would rank amongst a worse experience. And while I always say, I'm okay, I am really worried about my team. I worry about the position it puts them in. I know that this has happened to other politicians as well. And I think the problem fundamentally is that we want to encourage people to be able to participate in politics. We want all people from all walks of life to participate. And we don't want to create a climate where it is dangerous to be in politics, or where people feel their safety is at threat, or that their team's safety is at threat. That should never happen. It should never get to that point. And I think there is a responsibility that politicians play who purposely inflame these divisions or purposely spread misinformation that heightens the tensions. Those are things that we can stop doing. And I think we have to stop doing, so that there are disagreements. People can be angry, of course, if someone's cutting investments into healthcare and it means that your family's not going to get the care you need. Of course, people are going to be angry, and that's important to express that anger. But there is a point where expression of anger gets into a position of hatred or violence that is completely, there is no place for that in Canada. It's completely wrong. And so that's my reflection on it.
Good afternoon, Mr. Singh. Follow up on last week's pitch to have universal birth control access. So we are seeing, just across the hall, Ministers Duclos and Minister Ian making an abortion access announcement. I'll read off some of what they're announcing here for you right now. $3.5 million total over about 3 years. The first envelope, about $2.1 million, going to Action Canada for Sexual Health and Rights. Most of this to help increase their various information services, as well as help fund some travel for procedures like abortion. And the National Abortion Federation of Canada receiving about $1.4 million over the next 3 years to help provide logistic support for women seeking abortions who may need to travel. I just want to get your reaction to what the Liberals have just announced here, as well as if you've had any more talks with them on your pitch for universal contraception.
Thank you for the question. First of all, the government's been in power for 7 years. After 7 years, they're re-announcing a promise to increase some funding that they should have done years ago. And they're only doing this now after pressure placed by the NDP. Leah Gazan raised a question on this. I've been vocal on this. Our team has been vocal on this. And only in response to our pressure, questions I may put to the Prime Minister, are they acting now? And they're not actually acting in any sort of new way. They're just re-announcing what they've already promised to do. What we need to do in this country is to acknowledge the real serious problem with access. And to address that access, we propose a specific solution, a clear solution. If we were to move forward, as we are, we're going to fight and continue to make sure that the government follows through on the commitments we've obtained in our agreement, which is to move forward with pharmacare. We can start with contraceptives. Make sure that everyone in this country has access to contraceptives, both monthly or daily contraceptives, as well as emergency birth control. That is a concrete step towards access. We also need to make sure that provinces are fulfilling their obligation to provide funding for abortion services. This is what we want to see. We want to see a real meaningful increase in access. We want to see a real meaningful increase in supports for communities that are rural or remote, where you cannot get access to abortion services. That's what we're pushing for. We fundamentally believe in always defending the right. And at this point in time, one of the major concerns that we have is that people cannot get access in their communities, have to go hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers away from home to get access. That's something that needs to be addressed in this country. And that is a real concern, a live concern, and one that we're going to continue to fight to address.
And just on trying to negotiate what's going to be on the formulary for pharmacare once we start to see that roll out, if they didn't go full universal access, would you be open to something like the copay system that exists in Quebec right now that does also cover birth control? And just one last little logistic question: when you say universal access, does that also include IUDs and other long form birth control?
What we envision for our pharmacare plan, and the plan that we're fighting for, follows a recommendation laid out in the Dr. Hoskins report, which is for a universal, publicly delivered national pharmacare program, where we use the combined buying power of all provinces and territories, and the federal government contributes significantly towards bulk purchasing of medication so that everyone in this country is covered. Our plan also is that this medication is free as a part of our healthcare system. Because we've learned, which is not surprising, that if you want a healthcare system to work and you go to a doctor who prescribes you medication to stay healthy and you can't afford that medication, it really undermines the whole essence of a universal healthcare program. If you can't take the medication you need to stay healthy. And we also know this is one of those investments which will reduce costs, because as a result of the cost of medication, people aren't taking it when they need to. And then they get more and more sick. And we know when someone gets more and more sick, they end up in the emergency room, and it puts another burden on our healthcare system, one that was completely avoidable. So we want a broad as possible formulary, meaning the list of medication that's covered is as broad as possible, looking at other countries that have done such a thing. And we want to see birth control as something that is fully covered, entirely covered with no copays, no additional spending. We want people to be able to access the medication they need, the birth control they need, as a part of a universal healthcare system that covers medication.
That would include IUDs then, right?
Our formulary would be as broad as possible, so that would be something that we would be pushing for to include.
The next question is online. Mary Wolf, the Canadian Press. Go ahead. La parole est à vous.
Yes, just on the question of your visit to Peterborough, I'm aware that people were shouting traitor, but you also just mentioned that people were saying that they wanted you to die. Could you just clarify what exactly was said and whether it was directed towards you, Mr. Singh? And the other question is, when they were shouting traitor, do you regard this as a reference to your deal with the Liberals, or do you think that there was a backlash, to that? What was the motivation here of protesters? If you could comment on that, that would be great.
Certainly. I don't know what it was in reference to specifically. It was kind of a tense moment, lots of yelling and screaming, so it's hard to be able to make that determination of what the traitor was, like why that was being said, or specifically what that was directed to. And in terms of the death element, it was a general sense of "I hope you die," and I don't know who said it in particular, but that was included in the kind of the words that were being said. It was very aggressive. It was very violent. It was very tense. And the reason why I'm fine. I can handle that, but I just don't think that is what we want our politics to devolve into. It shouldn't be about these type of threats and that type of aggression. We want people to be passionate about their communities and care about their children and their future, and be angry about things that they think are going to hurt their communities. That's all a part of a good democracy. People should be able to express that. But obviously, we don't want people to be getting to the point of wishing death upon someone and having that type of context as a way to express their position on a matter of politics or a matter of policy or a law. That's obviously not something we want to encourage. We don't want a society like that. And to me, one of the major things that we can do is that we know that there are politicians that are inflaming that type of misinformation, are inflaming that type of hateful rhetoric, and absolutely we can take steps to stop that. And ideally, in a society where we live together, we want to find ways to not create extremes or where people are polarized. But again, disagreement, discourse, protests are all very healthy. I got no problem with it. People can protest at any event they want where I show up. But I really think that we've got to do something about tackling the polarizing and hateful discourse that's out there.
Marie, do you have a follow-up?
I do. Just on a related issue, my colleague mentioned that there's going to be a package of policy announcements today on abortion, but a lot of women who go to abortion clinics suffer a similar kind of abuse that you experienced, in fact, heckling, shouting, abuse when they walk in and out. And I wondered if you felt that was a problem and if there was anything that politicians could do to make sure that women accessing these services or seeking that kind of advice do not experience that kind of abuse.
Thank you again for the question. I think that, that happens, and that's completely wrong. It should not be happening. And so one of the proposals that has happened in Ontario is creating a safe zone around abortion clinics where no one can be yelling and hurling these type of things. Imagine how difficult the moment is for women, and on top of that, having people be able to yell at you and confront you in that way. It's just completely wrong. And so I think we can work with provinces to make sure that there's safe zones and people aren't being harassed and intimidated and accosted in that way. I think that's a good solution, and I'm open to more solutions of how we can make sure people feel protected and safe. But the access question can't be highlighted enough. In addition to where people can get access, they should be safe to do so. And then we need to make sure there's more access across the country.
Prochaine question sera pour Hélène Buzetti, le coop de l'information. La parole est à vous.
Oui, bonjour, M. Singh.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, je veux simplement vous entendre sur la motion du Bloc québécois là, demandant l'abolition de la prière quotidienne puis la remplacer par un moment de silence. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez?
Je pense que c'est une bonne idée. Je suis pour cette sorte de projet de loi. L'idée d'avoir un espace où on peut avoir notre propre réflexion. Les gens ont des spiritualités ou des religions, des pensées, des croyances différentes, et d'avoir un moment pour chacun de prendre le moment pour faire ce qu'il veut faire, si c'est spirituel ou dans une tradition religieuse ou non. Donc, je pense que donner les gens le moment de faire ce qu'ils veulent, c'est quelque chose de positif. Mais oui, c'est ça.
Excusez-moi. Et donc, j'en comprends que vous allez voter tout à l'heure pour, et je crois que c'est un vote libre chez vous. Corrigez-moi si je me trompe. Mais j'aimerais vous entendre sur une note peut-être un peu plus personnelle, parce que cette prière, bon, ça commence par Dieu Tout-Puissant, ça finit par Amen, ce qui a quand même une connotation chrétienne. Vous-même, vous n'êtes pas de confession chrétienne. Est-ce que ça vous dérange? J'aimerais vous entendre sur une note plus personnelle, s'il vous plaît.
Je pense que c'est, de mon avis, on doit avoir la capacité de s'exprimer personnellement. J'assiste les autres traditions, j'assiste les mosquées, les églises, et pour moi, c'est un moment spécial de participer avec les autres religions ou avec les groupes qui ne sont pas religieuses. C'est pour moi des moments spéciaux et j'apprécie ça. Et je préfère que dans un contexte parlementaire, que les gens ont la capacité de s'exprimer comme ils veulent au lieu d'avoir quelque chose qui est de une religion. Je pense que c'est meilleur d'avoir la capacité de s'exprimer et d'avoir cette liberté. Je pense que c'est positif. Et aussi, je crois, comme vous savez, profondément dans la séparation entre l'Église et l'État. Et donc, ça, c'est un exemple spécifique où on peut enlever un élément de l'opposé de séparation.
Et la dernière question sera Olivier Ferrand-Poissé de TVA.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Singh. J'aimerais simplement avoir votre réaction d'abord sur l'annonce de vols nolisés, 3 vols nolisés donc du gouvernement pour amener des Ukrainiens ici à partir donc du 23 mai. Est-ce que c'est suffisant? Est-ce que c'est assez rapide selon vous?
Ces vols, c'est une étape positive, donc j'encourage cette sorte des étapes. Mais en général, ce qu'on a entendu de la communauté ukrainienne, c'est le fait qu'il n'y a pas assez de ressources pour accueillir les nouveaux réfugiés. Et aussi, les barrières continuent d'exister pour les familles ou pour les gens d'arriver au Canada. Donc, c'est pourquoi on a poussé pour un accès non limité pour les réfugiés. Et finalement, ce qu'on doit faire, c'est d'envoyer toute l'aide possible aux Ukrainiens, toutes les aides possibles pour qu'ils puissent se défendre, mais aussi l'aide pour les financements pour l'aide humanitaire et aussi plus des outils pour accueillir les Ukrainiens. Ce sont nos demandes. Donc, on encourage cette étape, mais il y a du travail qui reste.
Follow-up,
J'aimerais aussi
maybe?
vous entendre. Oui. M'entendez-vous?
Oui.
Génial. J'aimerais vous entendre sur le chemin Roxham, parce que le gouvernement du Québec, le premier ministre, aujourd'hui, demande au fédéral d'intervenir, de le fermer, dit que, bon, on n'est plus capable d'accueillir, de gérer le volume là, qui passe à cet endroit-là, à la frontière. Le ministre de la Sécurité publique dit qu'on est en train de négocier une nouvelle entente avec les États-Unis. Mais selon vous, M. Singh, qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire là, à la frontière? Est-ce que ce serait une solution de le fermer, selon vous, ce chemin-là?
Il y avait pour longtemps un problème qui continue avec un manque de ressources pour nos travailleurs sur les frontières. C'est vraiment difficile, donc on doit avoir les ressources nécessaires pour répondre cet enjeu qui se passe. Dans notre avis, c'est vraiment cette question de manque de ressources, la responsabilité fédérale d'avoir les ressources nécessaires pour répondre à n'importe quelle situation. Bon, dans ce cas, c'est clair qu'il y a un manque de ressources.
Ceci met fin à la conférence de presse. Merci.
Merci.